While I do my little blah blah, Susie is going to share her screen. And for those of you who don't know Community Energy for Energy Solidarity, it'll show a little video that gives you some of our key principles and concepts. And I will talk about the logistics of today and all of the things that we just need to know to keep going. We would like you to make the chat very active. So please go ahead and drop into the chat who you are and what organization you represent. And my name is Marilyn Smith. I'm the founder of the Energy Action Project, and we are the communications and dissemination partner for the Community Energy for Energy Solidarity Project, or CEES. And CEES was very much developed as in response to the EU Green Deal, identifying energy communities as critical to the just, clean energy transition and to tackling energy poverty. But it was also recognizes that a lot of systems are not really in place yet to help that happen on a large scale. So our partners build up knowledge and experience in both practical aspects of delivering services to vulnerable households, and they also are investigating policy frameworks that help or hinder such activities and probing the very challenging aspect of how do you finance work to tackle energy poverty. So CEES is also investigating the business models that you need in order to work with people in energy poverty or vulnerable households, because it is very time intensive, and it's not easy to convince funders to fund that part of your work. It's easier to get people to fund where you can show your impact, not how you can spend a lot of time with people, and that's what we've found you need to do. So within the CEES project, pilot partners have had to agree to try something completely new in their operations that would ultimately help vulnerable households. And one of the first things we did was a survey to see who was in Europe within the energy community sector, who was already working in this area. And we've had about 100 responses, and 85% said they would like to work on energy poverty, but most were not really doing anything substantive at the moment. So it really spoke to the need for CEES and the ultimate product that we'll put out, which is an energy solidarity toolkit. So today we are talking about identify and engage. And so across CEES, we have 5 themes: identify, engage, act, support, and measure. And this really reflects that we recognize you need to identify who you want to work with. You need to then figure out the right ways to engage with them. Eventually, you need to take action within households that are in vulnerability, and that could be just soft measures or hard measures, which would be deep energy renovations. And then the support aspects, we cover both the financing aspect and the policy aspect, and then measuring is how do you make sure that you're measuring the impacts of what you do. As our pilots went through this process, it became really clear that separating out identify and engage is kind of a bit false or a bit difficult, because you need to identify the households, but you need to find ways to engage with them. And then it became really clear that that is not as easy as some of them thought it might be. And that was the discussion we had in our first webinar last week. And so this webinar is much more about how do you identify and engage with other actors or other stakeholders in this sector in order to reach those people that we know are out there, but you don't yet have a direct contact with. And last week, Paula from ZEZ, or Green Cooperative Green Energy Cooperative in Croatia, spoke a little bit about how they wanted to give cozy kits to people, and people didn't trust to take anything from an organization that they didn't know. And then at one point, Paula was invited to present on national television in the morning show, and suddenly everybody trusted CEES as an organization that they would open their doors to. So that's very much what we're going to talk about today. And the order of things that we're going to do, we've kind of flipped the normal webinar process. We're going to hear from 3 different pilot projects this morning. Then we're going to have a Q&A session where we want you to talk about, ask questions to the presenters, but also if you have some insights or experiences from your own efforts to engage with what we're calling the middle actors, then we'll have a time for you to do that. And then we're going to hear from Dr. C. Rotmann, who is with us from New Zealand tonight. And Dr. Rotmann is an energy justice researcher, and she's going to talk about the extensive work that she's been involved with the International Energy Agency and a wide range of people to dig into this question of how do you reach the hard to reach, including through middle actors. And C, do you want to just quickly pop in and say a couple of words at this point?
Kia ora. Hi, everyone from the future. It's not just me here from Aotearoa, New Zealand, but 2 of my colleagues from the Community Energy Network, which is great. So shout out to Gareth and Ian as well. And I really look forward to talking to y'all a bit about our research, which just finished phase 1, and we're now heading into phase 2.
Excellent. Thanks, C. So we are going to dive in with our first presentation is from Rachel McNichol at ALIenergy. And Ali, I'm going to let you, Rachel, explain exactly what ALIenergy does, sorry. And then go ahead with your presentation. Right?
Okay, hello everyone. I'm Rachel, as Marilyn said, from ALIenergy, and we are an energy advice agency working across the northwest of Scotland. And part of our CEES, our CEES pilot was moving into a new area. I've got some maps that show you the extent of the area that we moved into. And it was very different going from an area we've worked in for 20 years, where we're well known and recognised, and have no issue getting referrals from other middle actors for people that are in fuel poverty. So it was very different moving into a new area. It wasn't so easy for getting those referrals in, so we've had to do a lot of work, which I'll talk about. I'll just share my screen. Can you see that okay? Yep, great. So I'm going to talk about reaching people who don't ask for help. So as I said, for the last 20 years, we've worked in an area called Argyll and Bute. So we're well known and recognised. We work with a lot of other agencies and have a lot of middle actors who are referring their clients into our service. 2 years ago, we moved just north of there into an area called Lochaber, because there was no equivalent energy advice service there. And then our CEES pilot, seen us deliver this service, rolled that out to tenants across all of the Highland region that's shown in the right-hand side there, with the housing provider in that area. And it's a very remote, rural and island coverage. So we're experiencing working in those communities, because it's very different from rolling out a service to the central belt, but it's a lot more densely populated. But before we talk about how to engage with people who don't ask for help, we first have to actually ask ourselves why people don't ask for help. There's a lot of stigma around energy poverty. People are embarrassed, they're ashamed, they're scared of what will happen, especially if they're caring for children or elderly people. They might be worried that if they tell somebody they can't afford to heat their homes, their children might be taken away, or elderly relatives might be taken into care. A lot of people feel, what's the point, especially if they've been turned away from other support, or if they've been let down by somebody else. And often we speak to people who haven't been eligible for one thing, so they just assume that they're not eligible for anything else. People might not ask for help because once they ask for help, they have to acknowledge that they need support, or they might have to acknowledge that they have energy debt. Once they've made that acknowledgement, they can't ignore letters and requests for payment anymore. They have to accept responsibility to pay those bills. And then there's the realisation that they can't manage themselves, they actually need help. So there's a lot of hurdles for people to jump through or jump over, to put their hand up to ask for help. One of the ways that we try to overcome that is using the term affordable warmth instead of energy poverty. Affordable warmth is a positive term, it's inclusive, and there's a shared goal. Everybody from every background wants to be warm and be able to afford to put their heating on at home, so it doesn't exclude people or have that stigma attached to it. So what we done when we moved into this new area as part of our CEES pilot was we had to identify champions. We had to look for key people within that area who could help spread our message. So we went and talked to lots of different staff within the housing provider. They had their own network to spread the awareness. We invited ourselves into their team meetings and events. This gave us a guaranteed audience. There's nothing worse than setting up an information session and nobody coming along to it. So we had that guaranteed people meeting, and they wanted to help the people they're working with. So they had an interest in what we were doing. And working in a rural area, it was vital that we were made available for in-person presence. So the majority of our information presentations to these groups of middle actors was online. But we did make it clear that we could be available in person, because a lot of people in rural areas tend to feel left behind or forgotten about by mainland or larger organisations. With the CEES pilot, we had to start, we launched with our referral system. So to begin with, to manage demand and expectations, we only accepted referrals from housing provider staff. This made sure that we weren't overwhelmed with 15,000 tenants contacting us in the first week. We followed that up with an advert in the tenant newsletter, which instructed tenants to ask housing officers for a referral. And after a few weeks, couple of months, we would follow up with the middle actors within the housing provider teams with a reminder of the referral process and a selection of the various leaflets that we have that they could pass on. And that kept the service in their mind. The more they seen ALIenergy, the more likely they were to remember our service when they were talking to their tenants. After some months, the referrals were slow. At the very beginning, they weren't always appropriate. There was a bit of mixed expectation of what we could do and what was the responsibility of the housing association. So that meant we had to do more follow-up information sessions with the staff just to make it clear actually what we could do, because there were limitations to what we could do, because the housing association had a duty to provide the kind of physical improvements for the property. We were just the advice side. So after a few months, we decided to open up inquiries to tenants so they could get in touch with us or themselves. They could either do that through telephone, email, social media, or on our contact form on the website. And we thought this would be less stigma, because they wouldn't have to go to ask their landlord, in effect, that they needed help with their energy. And it gave the tenants independence and some responsibility. And since then, we have seen an increase in referrals coming directly from tenants, as well as still receiving referrals from the housing provider staff for the people that still need that extra bit of help. And again, we've done more refresher presentations to the housing provider staff. We shared case studies of the tenants we'd worked with, and we discussed specific issues that we'd found with the housing stock that they were working with, so that it was relevant to them. Our advisors are all, of course, trained to deliver energy advice, but the clients that we work with can be very vulnerable. So we do extra training in suicide awareness, dementia, gambling addiction, lots of other things. And we make it clear to these middle actors that we do this training so that they have some comfort and confidence that when they refer particularly vulnerable clients to us, we have an understanding of what other issues they might be going through. We know how to engage with these people, and we know how to support them so that we can signpost and refer them to other areas of support if we feel that's necessary, and if with their consent. So we've just actually hit a year this week since we started our CEES pilot, and over the year, a few things that we've learned. So time and resource restraints, the middle actors that we were contacting and talking to are very busy themselves with their own role, so we had to fit our information into their available time. So we were going to invite ourselves to their team meetings, where we're saying, how long can you give us on the agenda, and we would tweak our information to whatever time they had available. And we had to make a referral process as easy as we could for them. We didn't want the referral process to be a burden for them when they have such busy roles themselves. So we had to be flexible and take referrals, whether that was email. We had an inquiry form if they preferred to fill out a form, so they would have a copy of the referral, or they could phone up and give us details over the phone. We had to be consistent, responsive and flexible, so we had to do what we said we would do and in good time to build trust and confidence in our service. And I'm pleased to say the 3 advisors that we had employed for the CEES pilot have done excellent in the area and have built up a really good reputation. And we had to respond to their needs, so we had lots of different issues that were coming to us, and we done our best to deal with that. And it's really been a continuous development kind of curve. We've provided the initial information to the middle actors. We've followed up with feedback, and then we've had to tweak the information that we're given to make it clearer, or to make it more specific to the people that we're working with. But I would say after a year, we're finally at a point where we're getting a steady stream of referrals in. But I do think nobody could have imagined it would take that long. Actually, it was a lot harder than we thought it would be working in this new area. I don't know if you want to do questions now, Marilyn, or if you're keeping that to the Q&A. I'll let you decide that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do Q&A after all 3 of the presentations, but I already have some ideas for a question for you. So nobody else does. Right. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's really interesting to see how quickly you had to move into a new area and work with a bunch of different actors, and the experience that you brought over the last 20 years definitely, I'm sure, helped that process. We're now going to hear from João Lopes from Coopernico in Portugal. And I specifically chose to put João next because they are an energy community. They've been an energy community for a while, but this joining CEES was the first foray that they made into tackling energy poverty. And so you really did need to work with other organizations, and we're keen to hear your experience of that. And I think the title of João's presentation is interesting. It's working with intermediaries, the intermediate dilemma, which implies that there was some good things and some bad things about it. So João, if you're there, you can introduce yourself and forge ahead.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm João. I work in Coopernico, which is the first renewable energy cooperative in Portugal. This year we will be turning 10 years old. And we started with doing investments in renewable energy, solar energy, power plants mainly in social institutions, and that's where our cooperative loans scheme was born. Then we also got into the supply sector, so we are also suppliers for households and families. And then we have a broad range of energy services that go from buying surplus from our members, the surplus of the energy that they produce, to things like this European project where we tackle energy poverty. But as Marilyn said, we did not have specifically an activity for energy poverty before we had European projects like this one. So, and this goes well to do the bridge with what I'm going to say. So if you can please go to the next slide, Susie. So we know some local stakeholders through our usual work, and one that we have a very good relationship is an energy agency in the south margin of Lisbon Bay. So we contacted them and we partnered with them, and the idea was really to, because of what I say here, is to identify people in energy poverty with stakeholders that know the context well enough. And this in part was an inspiration from what ALIenergy did. And we had some good results. We had a very good attendance. So we could reach a lot of people in each session, an average of 20 per session, without doing a lot of advertising ourselves. And it was up to 40 people. So the biggest sessions at around 40 people. And I think it's the one in the photo, yeah. And it was also a very pleasurable group experience for us and for the people that were attending, because in a group setting you have the opportunity to share tips, to hear what other people have to say, and really to feel like you are in an informal setting. And that was also something we tried to convey. But I did not, but maybe I can talk about that if I have enough time. But for now, you can go to the next slide. So yeah, so people like to talk. But all these disadvantages also came with some disadvantages. So with an intermediary that did not have already a lot of experience with energy poverty. So one of the reasons they partnered with us was that they also wanted to know how their territory was on those terms, in terms of energy poverty. But there was also, because of this, there were delays in entropy. The contacts took a long time to respond. And so the process was, we contact the energy agency. In their turn, they contacted their local municipality, because they work with 4 municipalities. And then the municipality contacted senior universities. So the first idea here was, well, maybe we could have already contacted the senior universities. We were able to reach some people in energy poverty because of the contact from the municipalities, the social action departments, but also a lot of people were not in energy poverty. So it was also, in some places, it was a diverse group of people. But yeah, some people going there were beneficiaries of social incomes, so state aids. And also another issue with this, and I think it is shared with other cases, is that it's very hard to do home visits. And we really felt that it was a bit surprising to us, because we thought that people normally would want help, and yeah, would want help, but they were very afraid of letting strangers in their house. So now, if you can go to the next slide, please. So I think that the main takeaways here is that if we want to just explore some field, some territory, we can partner with a local stakeholder that knows it well. But when we want to do a specific action, and like ours is to tackle energy poverty, we should partner with an organization that has experience in that team. And of course, not necessarily energy poverty, but at least in poverty. because I think that, for example, if we partnered with an organization that was already doing home visits, experience in that, we could have more easily been able to do that. And I also say from experience that in another project that very recently, in the end of September, we did a lot of home visits because we were with local housing company that is owned by a municipality, and we did not have any difficulty in going to people's houses. We also already did an agreement with another municipality in which we are going to do home visits because it's the social housing. So yeah, when we have organizations that work already with home visits, it's a lot easier to do this. So yeah, I think that's it for now. I will stop now, but maybe if you have questions, I can answer them. And there are also some other dilemmas in this work.
Great. So Zhao will pass the floor on for the moment and do Q&A after our third presentation this morning, which is from Rachel Brain. And Rachel is with Repowering London, and this is an organization that has been doing community energy and tackling energy poverty for a longer period of time. So Rachel, over to you.
Thank you. Just share my screen with you here. You got that okay?
Yeah, perfect. It's in display mode even. Thank you.
Perfect. So I'm Rachel and I am from Repowering London. Repowering London is a community energy development organisation in London. And we are like Coopernico, we're also 10 years old this year. We were established in 2013. And at the time that we were established in 2013, our first community energy installation was on an urban social housing estate in London, and that was a first in the UK at the time to install community-owned renewable energy assets on urban social housing. And so sort of from the outset, I think that context has informed Repowering's sort of approach to working in and with communities that are traditionally a bit underrepresented or underserved by the community energy sector. So we now support 10 local solar cooperatives in different areas across London with 650 member investors. And over the last 10 years, we've run and iterated a range of programs to support people in our communities living in fuel poverty, kind of responding to different contexts at the time. So that's ranged from home visits and energy cafes to a more one-to-one energy advice service, more like what ALIenergy offers that we ran during COVID. But at the moment, our focus is on capacity building and trying to build, sort of capacity and momentum to advocate for more sort of systemic change is the direction that we're currently focused on. So one important aspect of this that I'm going to talk about is working with locally rooted community leads as a sort of intermediary for this session on identifying and engaging with people through intermediaries, but also as a way of building relationships with new intermediaries. So in the last couple of years, this is something that Repowering has trialed and now sort of moved on to expanding, which is recruiting local community leads into paid part-time roles where they lead on engagement in their own neighborhood or community. And so importantly, we've recruited these community leads from outside the traditional sort of climate or energy sectors. And it's also been really important to make sure that those were paid roles, to really sort of value the expertise that those community leads are bringing in the form of lived experience, but also expertise on how to engage with their own, you know, kind of communities that they're invested in. So we started with community leads in 3 of the local areas that we're working in, 3 people who were all provided with training and NVQ level 3 qualification in energy awareness. And we're also sort of supported to I guess, kind of have some peer learning amongst their cohort on what they're doing and what's working in their own local areas. And we've tried to set up these roles, or we kind of view these roles internally as stepping stones as well to further employment in the climate and energy sectors, which still tend to lack diversity in a lot of ways. So one of our first 3 community leads has just taken on a new role internally, leading on some retrofit work that we're developing. So that's exciting to see. In practice, what these community leads have done is they have built connections with new networks like faith communities or support groups for mums, as a couple of examples. So they go along to local venues and to local events, and they speak to people about community energy and also about energy advice. So at things like libraries, community centers, street parties, festivals, residents association meetings, sort of quite a range. Yeah, talking about both what, you know, sort of tips people can use now to help with their energy efficiency at home, and to sort of help respond to the context of the energy crisis we're in, but then also talking to people about potential for community energy to kind of build more systemic solutions to the energy crisis and to the fuel poverty that people are experiencing in the longer term. And our community leads have also delivered workshops with training on energy and efficiency and energy rights for different local groups. So that's one of our community leads speaking at a local event. And I think a few of the sort of important, I guess, ways that this model has worked for us are set out here. First one is around building trust. So really trying to leverage existing and sort of informal social networks to share information about energy rights and energy advice. So in practice, that might take the form of things like neighborhood WhatsApp groups. And those forums we've found can be really sort of valuable for reaching people who might not otherwise have trust in institutions, where if information comes to them through a channel like their neighborhood WhatsApp group, where there's more sort of existing trust built up, that can be really valuable for reaching people, and then for getting them out to events like workshops as well. Sort of second pillar around building capacity, I think applies both in terms of building capacity for the community leads who've been recruited into these roles and who've been upskilled on energy awareness, on sort of energy system and climate topics, but also for the capacity that they're building in their own communities through running workshops. And then this sort of third pillar around building support for systemic solutions, I think, is important because, as I sort of mentioned a couple slides back, there's value in providing energy, energy advice, tips on, where people can go for additional support if they can't pay their energy bills, that sort of thing, signposting to benefits they might not be receiving. But at the same time, in the context that we're working in, those aren't solutions that are getting to the root of the problem. And so we're kind of also trying to build more kind of diverse voices behind a coalition looking at what community energy projects can do to ultimately provide cheaper energy for people who are living in fuel poverty more broadly. So that's kind of, I guess, three of the important ways that I think our community leads are working. Anecdotally, when they're talking to people about community energy and about the initiatives that we run, they also spend a lot more time focusing on social benefits and on the really sort of practical stuff, and a lot less time talking about climate. I think they also are kind of well placed to talk in an accessible way about the energy system to new audiences. And so that's been, sort of really, really valuable. But then coming on to lessons and challenges, the community lead roles that we have been entirely grant funded to date. And so that's one of the things that we've been looking at with our CEES project, is how we build more sustainable funding mechanisms into our work to kind of have a have a more predictable, more sustainable way of making sure these things are funded longer term, moving beyond the sort of grant funding cycle. And so we have explored possibilities for how community lead roles that we have and how community lead roles in new areas that we're starting to work in could be funded through potentially the local authority, where there's a local authority that's kind of providing some support for setup of a new community energy group in their area, how these roles could potentially be funded longer term by the local community energy co-op that they're working with. And then what we've been trying to pilot with our CEES project is looking for funding from local businesses, more sort of corporate social responsibility funding, in more sort of donation form. And so that's a bit of a work in progress. And I guess the kind of moral is that we found this to be a really valuable way of working, but funding it is and remains a challenge. So yes, I will leave it there, but
Great.
you.
Thank you, Rachel. And Linda Hamilton has put a question into the chat, which is for the first Rachel, but I think it's relevant for all of you. Is there, how have you been measuring the impact of what you do? And just before we let Rachel McNichol answer that, or anybody else that wants to, we're going to give the floor to Kevin Burchell, who is in the CEES project from the University of Birmingham. And their role is really to evaluate how well these measures are, that the pilots are putting in place, how effective they are, and then whether they weren't being put into our final output, which is, as I mentioned, this solidarity toolkit. So Kevin, I'm going to give the floor to you to talk a little bit about evaluating the identify and engage mechanisms for working with partners.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Marilyn. And thanks to everyone who's joined us for the webinar. It's great to see everyone. Yeah, so, what we've been doing in CEES is, one of the things that we've been doing is talking to all of the partners who are implementing these projects on a regular basis. And so, just distilling a little bit what we've heard in the presentations, it's very clear to us that working with local partners, intermediaries or middle actors, whatever you want to call them, I think João and I started calling them bridges as well, it can be very, very helpful, but of course it also comes with its problems. It's difficult to implement these kinds of projects, and then of course if you're working with an external partner or partners, that's challenging as well for all kinds of reasons, which we can perhaps talk about a bit later. So, but also what I'd like to specifically talk about is just to offer some ideas for evaluating the impacts and the processes of working with local partners. And I'll offer a couple of possible objectives, some questions that you might ask yourselves, and a couple of ideas about methods for finding out such information as well. And I would also add that I'm focusing very specifically on this topic this morning, but we do have a sort of CEES slide deck of some broad-based principles for evaluation, and those will be available as well, along with the specific slides for this webinar and for the other 3 as well. So, this is a very standard kind of evaluation objective, to understand the processes and the impacts of what you're doing, in this case, working with local partners. And the idea here, obviously, ultimately, is to improve the mechanism, improve what you're doing, but you might also want to use what you find out in other contexts, in some of your promotional work or in funding bids and so on. So some ideas for questions that you might ask yourselves about the process. Here, the first question is classically a descriptive question. What were the plans? And then, more analytically, what successes and challenges were experienced in the implementation of the plans? And then how was that responded to? And it becomes an iterative thing after that. It's basically what happened, what worked well, what could be improved. Those sorts of questions are what we're asking with respect to the process. In terms of impacts, we can think about the impacts for your project. So how many people were recruited to the project? Were they the right people? You'll remember that Joao said that sometimes people came to his workshops who he felt weren't in energy poverty. So, that's an important question. And I covered a lot more about that in the webinar last week. But we can ask ourselves also, what were the impacts for the local partners? And, again, so Rachel at Repowering has mentioned that working with local champions builds their own capability, and that there's a lot of learning there. And Joao mentioned that his local partners had the objective of learning more about energy poverty. So you can hopefully find out something about impacts on your local partners, but also you can ask a question about the impacts for your own organization in terms of developing what you're doing and in terms of developing sustainable relationships for the future. Would you want to work with these organizations further? And again, or make those sorts of decisions on this basis. These are just ideas, and there are lots of ways of doing these things. But in terms of households, I talked about this last week as well. But it's important to monitor the progress of households through your project. So this is Excel spreadsheet time with dates and so on. Lots of dates and information in there. But you can get a lot of really good information about how these things worked and some of the impacts as well from talking to the people who are managing the project and the people who are delivering the project on the ground. And sometimes these are the same people, but sometimes it's different people. And it may well be possible for you to talk to those local partners, to the intermediaries, about their experiences in the project and find out a bit more about whether they achieved their objectives of participating and what kinds of things happened, there. So that's, that's a real whistle stop tour of it's all a lot more complicated than that, as the partners at CEES know. But I'll leave it there and hand back to Marilyn, and I can answer some questions later if anyone would like to pitch in. So thanks everyone.
Thanks, Kevin. And I've just popped into the chat a link to a blog on evaluation that is on the CEES website, and it links to the longer presentation on evaluation that Kevin mentioned that was done almost a year ago, I think. So I am now going to give the floor back to Rachel and Zhao to more specifically answer Linda's question about how are you measuring the social impacts. And if you could each just mention some things within 2 or 3 minutes, that would be great, because then we want to move on to hearing from C. Rotmann. So Rachel McNichol, do you want to go first? The question was first posed to you. So I'm going to
so we record the usual things, demographics, the client gains, and then with Kevin involved with the survey that we're doing with clients from the CEES evaluation, we're asking questions about the impact of how people feel towards affording their energy, their comfort levels, and their health and well-being. They have an impact survey. They fill out a baseline when we first work with them, and then 3 months later we try to carry out a follow-up survey. But as Kevin knows, it's not always so easy to do the follow-up survey, given the client group we work with. They're not the typical people that receive a survey and think, oh, I'm going to fill that survey out. They have lots of other things going on, and a survey isn't the priority for them. So we've had to do a lot of work trying to keep them engaged to get that survey completed.
I can jump in on behalf of Repowering to say that, yeah, there's a couple of different things in terms of measuring the impact that our community leads model has had. One is the basic quantitative stuff, number of people that they've reached, number of people they've spoken to and or given some form of energy advice to. There's also number of workshops that they've run, and then number of new volunteers that they've recruited to their local energy co-ops from kind of groups that we might not normally recruit volunteers from is another one that we've been looking at that's a little bit less relevant to the energy poverty side of things, but that's something that we try to keep track of as well. And then more qualitatively, we're looking at the range of organizations that we now have some kind of connection with, maybe because we ran an energy advice workshop there, that are new to us, and that might not have been kind of a connection we would have fostered without having the community leads on it. And then I think there's also something qualitative in terms of the sort of stories firsthand from each of our community leads about the experience they've had and kind of where it's taken them. I think there's it would be lovely to do more on this as well. I think something that's sometimes been tossed around internally is this idea of having like a social return on investment, which is a lot more involved to really kind of produce responsibly. I think it is also something that, as we're learning more about what fundraising from stakeholders like businesses looks like compared with grant funding, that might be something that would be kind of valuable to build into the narrative. But but also at the same time, we want to be kind of mindful of what sort of extra burden that would add, and not to kind of put too much evaluation work into what the community leads are doing.
Zhao, do you quickly have anything you want to add?
Yeah, so actually this was the other dilemma that I was talking about, the informality dilemma. So at the same time that we want to engage people and not make them intimidated, And I believe that the attendance and the interest would be a lot lower if we did, because this is about their necessities, not about our necessities. But this informality also creates a relaxation that enables, like cross-talking. So this has to be controlled in a light and funny way. And it also makes a proper evaluation harder, because it's people are instead of writing their responses, they are talking with each other. They are talking about a question in specific. They start talking a lot. So this is positive in some ways, but negative in others. Furthermore, some people, and I guess that it's more common in people that are in energy poverty, have sight issues, or some of them don't know how to read. So it's always a bit harder. And there's also a funny story because of the need to build this informal setting, is that when we returned, so because we do, as my colleagues have also mentioned, we do a first baseline survey, and then after some months we go again. And when we went again to one place, we discovered that some of the people did not, they have filled in the survey, but then did not give it to us. And the explanation that our host there gave was that they were not very happy because we said they would be having a snack with us, but they thought that the snack was not enough. So they were not very, we did not meet their expectations on that. So yeah, I mean, it is a bit challenging to do the surveys. And then after 3 months, it's also hard to keep track of the people that filled it in, and that or some of them may not have given us. So yeah. And also another big thing is some privacy and security concerns, because sorry, some people have arrived at the office. Because there's some energy companies have a practice of arresting people, especially old people here in Portugal, to change their provider. So questions about energy always suffer from this, especially if we ask for energy bills or for addresses or for contacts. So after the 2 first sessions, we noticed there was some tension with that. So we stopped doing that and only had like the CEES ID, and then the hosts kept the CEES ID with the names of the people, so that to contact them again, we would have to go through them. So I hope this was clear, and sorry if there's some back noise.
Kevin, I'm going to quickly give the floor to you. I see your hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. Yeah, thanks for the question, Linda. It's a really important one. And, so I think as the evaluators, what we decided early on was that a full breadth social impact evaluation wasn't really feasible. And we did keep the focus of the questions and the evaluation on processes and on energy poverty in terms of impacts in households. But there was one other sort of social aspect that kind of pervades the kind of things that we're asking about. And that was just about social connectivity and feeling part of something and a feeling of belonging. And that question emerges in all parts of our evaluation. And the reason that we did pick out that one, Linda, was just because of the emphasis on solidarity that is at the heart of the CEES project. So of all of the social things that you could look at, that seemed like a most important one to pick out. But it's, especially with households, it's really, really difficult. And I think this will come up again next week when we talk about the actual alleviation parts of the projects. I hope that helps a bit, Linda.
Yeah, it seems to be quite a difficult one to quantify in a way, doesn't it? I mean, it's. I don't think it's. I've not come across anything that has actually quantified this as a metric. Yeah, I'll keep looking.
We're having a good go. We are having a good go, and I think we're probably doing something that's more comprehensive than has been possible in most cases. So yeah.
Okay.
Great. Okay. And at the end, I'm going to pop into Linda. I'm glad you asked this question and also took the floor a little bit. At the end, I'm going to pop in the link to last week's webinar, in which Nina Campbell talked about some new indicators that New Zealand is using, which I think do create more opportunity for measuring impacts. But for now, we're going to hand the floor over to Dr. C. Rotmann. And C is a behavior change expert, interestingly with a PhD on human impacts on coral reefs, but clearly she has become passionate about the energy space and energy justice and how humans and energy interact and how energy impacts humans and how energy use impacts the planet. So she has run the first behavior change research collaboration under the Users Technology Collaboration Program by the International Energy Agency, and that was done over the period 2012 to 2018. Since 2019, she's been focusing on hard-to-reach and hidden energy users, addressing energy justice and how to build trusted relationships with these community middle actors. She also works in close collaboration with industry program managers, government policymakers, community and frontline navigators, and research experts in Oceania, North America, and Europe, and undertakes a lot of qualitative field research with marginalized energy users. So C, I'm going to give you the floor, and I expect you're going to have a lot of interesting things to say about all of what has been talked about before now.
Yeah, kia ora. And being a typical scientist, of course, I crammed a million slides in here to try and get into 20 minutes. So seeing you've all kept your time so well, I'll try and do so as well. There's a lot of links to publications and stuff if anyone is interested to do some very heavy reading after this. But obviously everything you've said so far makes a lot of sense. I've experienced very similar things. And yeah, so I'm just going to crack in so I can keep us in time. I'm going to give a quick summary overview of almost 5 years of research, which, I'm bagging a lot into it. I'm going to give 2 examples from field research we've done in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And if I have any time, I'd like to talk a little bit about, just touch on the energy policy trilemma. So as Marilyn has said, this research collaboration has been evolving over the last almost 13 years now under the Users TCP. We started with focusing on behavior change models and theories and how we can turn them into practice, realized all models are wrong, but some of them are useful, and that we should instead focus actually on the behavior changes because they were often the problem. So these are the people who design the behavior change interventions in government, in industry, in research, in the community. And so we developed a multi-stakeholder facilitation framework to try and get a collective impact approach with these different behavior changes. And then we trialed that around the world in field research. And then we realized that we're actually missing a whole lot of energy users that were called hard to reach by our industry partners, especially in North America, or underserved, not undeserved, underserved. And so we wanted to focus on them. And that's what we did for the last 4.5+ years. We just finished that first phase. And then, of course, we realized that there are a lot more and more diverse groups than just energy poverty or low income. And so we really want to delve particularly into the hidden and invisible and really marginalized energy user groups. And actually, instead of just providing, band-aid solutions for the symptoms, to really start addressing this underlying systemic and structural cause for energy injustice. And that's what we are just kicked off on the 1st of November and are doing hopefully for the next 3+ years. So our definition of hard to reach energy users is really broad, and it was so on purpose because we really didn't want to miss any categories of hard to reach energy users. We looked in the residential and non-residential sector, and we really wanted to find all the different types of groups. what we also designed with our partners, the Sea Change Institute in California, is and we tested that in the field, a research framework that's based on, it marries design thinking and really robust social science methodology. And it's meant to be there to get you through a process of behavior change rather than seeing it as just a design thing, because most behavior changes start at the design stage, but they don't do enough of that initial discover phase where they're really especially aligning with the different stakeholders and finding them. And they also often don't define the target audiences really well. There's a lot of especially psychographic information that's usually not collected. So just to go very quickly, and this is largely, I'm going to give the slides to Marilyn afterwards, and if anyone is interested, here are the publications. So in our discover phase, we did a huge landscape and stakeholder assessment with surveys and expert interviews. We accidentally, during the first lockdown, wrote a giant, it ended up being a book, a literature review of almost 1,000 publications, which we called The Beast, because it just kept growing and kind of getting out of the way. And what we found in that was that obviously there's a lot of the criticism around the terminology of hard to reach, because they're not hard to reach. We shouldn't put the onus on them for being easy to reach. The onus is on us, the behavior changes who are trying to reach them. There's a lot of different definitions that academics have been, having a field day arguing about. Is it fuel poverty? Is it energy poverty? Is it energy hardship? Is it energy burden? Is it, it's really important that you nail a definition down. Nina, last year in New Zealand, we tried to nail one down around both energy hardship and the flip side being the aspirational goal of energy well-being, and there being a spectrum. To me, that makes sense. But it's just important to define it very clearly what you're talking about. The main focus in the literature was on low-income households and renters, again, in the residential sector. But we found that actually the biggest gap in the research was around particularly small to medium businesses, the 97% of the commercial sector. High income, high consumers were basically not served at all with programs or policies, and they are definitely in the hard to reach basket for very different reasons. In the commercial sector outside of the office sector, there was very little research, particularly in the MUSH sector, which is municipalities, universities, schools, hospitals, vast energy users, really not much work done that's directly working with the building managers and building operators there. And then, of course, the marginalized hidden energy users, which I'll talk a bit more here. And we hypothesized that the hard to reach were about 30% of energy users. And then after we did this analysis, we basically went, it's at least 2/3, if not 3/4. And that is because our energy system is actually set up to be so unjust that they really are largely invisible and in the hard to reach basket, in the too hard basket. One of the things that the gap analysis has also showed that we are really not focusing enough on understanding the psychographics. So that's like the lifestyles, their ideas around status, their attitudes, their motivations, their energy literacy, their actual behaviors. And we focus a lot on barriers, but not so much on their needs. And for that, of course, to understand their needs, you need to have the contact with those people who understand their lived experience. We did a whole lot of case study analysis. I totally agree, case studies are great. We used the building blocks framework to do ex post analysis via a template, which actually let us do a cross-country case study comparison that it's the bottom one there, which we've just published in Energy Research and Social Science. And so we looked at 19 case studies from 8 countries around the world, both residential and commercial sector. And with that kind of using that building blocks framework, it gave us the chance to see where there were real methodological strengths and weaknesses. And the weaknesses were definitely in the using good behavioral science to design and test, pre-test engagement strategies, and also in evaluation. So what the case study analysis really showed us, obviously, like you all know, using trusted middle actors, actually the people in our community, especially Indigenous, Maori and Pacifica, told us that they preferred the term community navigators. Also, you need to recognize that we usually see them as a very positive thing, but sometimes they're also gatekeepers, and it's actually keeping you away from the individuals who they feel like they need to protect from any undue, interest. And I also want to just point out that my friend Katie Jander and Yael Parag have long argued academically about there being a difference in the terms middle actor and intermediary, with middle actors having both agency and capacity for change, and they're not just conduits. So there is a whole vast amount of literature. Again, it's about definitions that mostly academics are interested in, but I'm going to go with what my community told me they like, and that's navigators. I like the bridges as well. So co-designing interventions with them, properly co-designing, which of course does all the things that everyone said. You need to remunerate them. You need to really take proper care with their time. They're so overburdened. They're under-resourced. They're undervalued. And you're just chucking a whole extra lot of stuff on them. And so it's really important that, you try and be able to actually pay them well and train them up. The training is really important. And the face-to-face and in-home advice is obviously the things that work best, but like we heard about the challenges, it's really hard to get into people's homes without those kind of trusted people that they would actually feel comfortable with. And it's obviously a lot more resource intensive, but especially with the most vulnerable energy users, I think it's really worthwhile trying to do that. And what's also really important that I haven't really heard yet, it was kind of touched on that you don't want to talk about climate change too much, but you also shouldn't talk about saving kilowatt hours with some of these groups. In Aotearoa, New Zealand, we have an incredibly poor housing stock, and those people are already curtailing their energy use as much as possible, and are making themselves and their families sick by doing so. And so the last thing you want to tell them is that they now need to, use less heating, save more kilowatt hours for the planet or something, because they're usually the people who would actually do that. They're more altruistic inclined than a lot of the rest of us. So we then did a whole lot of field research in North America and in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I'm not going to focus on the North American one. That was largely with industry and more focused on the commercial sector. In New Zealand, we worked with the two largest retailers, Mercury and Genesis Energy. They were keen to take a leadership role. They realized they needed to do different and better and talk more to their communities. And so we used the building blocks framework again. We did the, discover phase with a big landscape overview. We developed a quiz with just stats and facts of how the different marginalized groups in Aotearoa, New Zealand actually suffer from hardship. And even the people, the best anyone got in the room was 50% right. And that's the people who work on that in the field. That is how shocking some of the statistics are. And then again, we did a big stakeholder assessment, and we had the different behavior changes in the room. And so it's really important that you do that work in the start of a project where you actually find out both internally and externally who are the different behavior changes, who are those who make decisions or who work in policy, who are those who provide either energy or the technology that you need to use, who are the various experts, including evaluation experts, social scientists that you can partner with. And then I have like two middle actor groups that are the most important ones, because they get you the direct access, especially during those moments of change when people's life changes, when they have a baby or they look after elderly parents or caring for someone, or they buy a new car or change homes or buy a new appliance because the old one broke. Those are the middle actors that you want in the trades, really, to train them up, to give the right advice at the right time. And then there are those middle actors who I call the conscience, who are basically looking after the social and environmental justice issues all the time. And they are just as important. And you guys work with a lot of those. So we developed this kind of like social ecosystem gamified way, which we call the behavior change framework. And it really helps you play out the different relationships between the different behavior changes and the energy end user as well, and figuring out what you're actually trying to change and what already works in the system and what doesn't. This is what that looks like. A lot more messy when you do it, in the field, plus my handwriting is terrible. And then of course, we also went into like really discussing like who could be the potential audiences for this research, how easy or how hard are they to reach, what's the impact. And so I really thought that it seemed like we were going to focus in on the so-called squeezed middle, i.e. those middle to high income energy users that are now really suffering with cost of living, especially, and only if they don't already own property or assets. And they are right now in kind of like a really difficult position where they're dealing with the status loss, that they're basically becoming the working poor. They are not eligible for various government funding because they earn too much income, and they're not showing up on the industry radar yet because they haven't usually fallen into debt yet. They have started doing other things, either behaviorally restricting their energy use or asking family and friends to loan them money, or even going to like loan sharks or something, but they're still paying like the direct debits, for example, because they don't want to use the prompt payment discount of 15%, which you get in New Zealand, which we're trying to get rid of because it's inequitable. And so I thought we were going to focus on them because there's potentially quite a large group that are still teetering on the cliff. They haven't fallen into full energy poverty yet, and they're potentially more easy to reach. And then because we had a strong community representation and voice in the room, they said, no, you need to focus on those who need it the most. It's about providing the best impact for the whānau of families on the ground. And to the credit of those two big retailers, they actually let us go into this research with those hidden energy users. And I kind of developed this diagram, and it finally started making sense how there is an increasing scale of both hardship and hard to reachness as you go down this kind of Dante's, inferno, the different cycles of hell. And so the ones that we're really interested in now are those that are actually hidden and either want to remain hidden on purpose, or are just put in the too hard basket, or are just like not thought of. The disabled, for example, are very often not thought of by policymakers or program managers. So we then kind of started sub-segmenting them a bit more. We were also told by our community navigators very clearly that they don't like having their whānau or family put into boxes, and I totally appreciate that. From a research perspective, this audience segmentation is an important way of making sure that you actually, figure out who the right middle actors are that you want to engage, and do that demographic and psychographic analysis and understand their needs, which are, slightly different. Obviously, there's massive intersectionalities between all these things. They're usually also low income. They're often renters. They often live in social housing. They often have several of these, issues at the same time. But there is less and less empathy the further down you go into this kind of cycle of hell, as I said, of multi-generational trauma and multi-generational poverty and the impact of that. And once you go to those illegalized and criminalized groups, it becomes really hard to find them, and they have extreme distrust and fear of any kind of authorities, including experts in research or industry. When we asked our community providers why they thought, because the majority of them said that their clients would fall under this kind of like they want to remain hidden kind of segment, or they are a hidden segment, why they thought that was the case, they said, almost all of them said it was whakama, which is that stigma, shame, embarrassment, guilt. Also difficulties understanding, especially around energy literacy, but also language sometime, or just literacy itself. A lot of fear of getting losing their homes. Most of them were renters, getting disconnected from power. Not wanting to be a burden was a really big one in isolated elderly and refugee and immigrant groups especially. Not wanting the family to know. What's really interesting that none of them thought that it was because they thought it was only temporary. And that would be quite a different answer if we're talking about the squeezed middle, or say student flatters who live in energy poverty during their studies in big shared rent flats in poor housing. I was one of them for 10 years. But like you kind of think that it's going to get better once, you finish your studies. And that is not something that those multi-generational vulnerable groups experience. So we did do a big co-design phase. And funnily, Nina was talking about last week about how energy well-being, which is a great measure, especially for people like us, we're still here mostly white by the looks of it, we think that's awesome. This was the workshop that she said the government's idea of energy well-being was quite attacked. And it was because it was largely Māori and Pacifica groups that have huge inequity in both the income, the living quality, that they live 10 years less on average than Pākehā or Palangi white people. And so, for them, it was kind of like almost offensive to talk about energy well-being when their whānau basically struggled to survive. So just to hark back to last week's webinar. And so what the industry did is they really tried very hard to like deal with those almost 70 ideas that came up with the community groups, and then they went back to the community to ask, if they were on the right track. And now they're going forward and actually deploying some of them in partnerships with the community. The second one I quickly want to touch on is also Nina mentioned last week. It's a support for energy education in communities fund that the government has done. I was always obsessed with these kind of home energy assessment toolkits or heat kits that a lot of libraries, I found them first in Ireland, but all over the English-speaking world, libraries and city councils loan them out. But what I thought was a real shame with them is that there wasn't really any behavioral or in-home data collected with them. There was no training given to the librarians to really explain what this was about, and to people who self-selected to loan these kids weren't the most vulnerable or hard to reach people. And so I thought, can we redesign these kits to be like more specific to those vulnerable whānau? And so we reached out, this was just a pilot, 45 households in the Wellington region, and we reached out to three quite different middle actors. Two were Pacifica churches in different areas. One was a social housing provider, and one was a sustainability trust that installs insulation and runs a free curtain bank. So quite different approaches to both energy use and healthy home advice. We focused in on, we gave them all training that's called Home Performance Advisor Making Energy Work for whānau training. The training was specifically designed by a foundation for middle actors that are not energy or healthy housing specialists, but that do other things like providing community budget advice or social support services. And so it was really simplified how we discuss energy use in the home. And so the way it was done was in 3 buckets. There's the lighting and appliance bucket, there's the hot water bucket, and then there is the healthy bucket, which is heating, ventilation, mold. And so what we really, really, really wanted to just make very clear to both the advisors that we trained and the people whose homes we went into is that they could minimize the energy use by switching things off or swapping things out in the heating, in the lighting and appliance and in the hot water bucket, but then they should really prioritize putting any savings into the healthy bucket and ensuring that that their homes were warm, dry and comfortable, which is very hard to do, as I said, with the poor housing stock in New Zealand. So we redesigned those kits. We designed activities, 2 weeks worth of activities, about 5 to 10 minutes a day. Really important was the co-design work because, I blundered in there and I work with North American industry a lot. They talk about vampire energy for standby energy waste. And so I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And so I found this comic about, energy vampire hunters. And so I started all these activities around, hunting the energy vampires. And then when I talked to the Pacifica churches, they just looked at me in horror that I was going to tell their kids about vampires and make them chase vampires. And so that was a total no-go. And so instead we changed it to power sucking ngamu, which are sandflies. Anyone in the South Pacific knows what they are like. And that made a lot more sense in a cultural context, which is why it's important that, especially if you're from a different culture than your target audiences, that you really work with those who understand the lived experiences. So we recruited them, we interviewed them, we collected a lot of psychographic data. They did their daily activities for 2 weeks. Then we picked up the kits and dropped off prices. And then we called them again after 4 months to see what stuck. And to our total amazement and surprise, we actually got 100% success rate with these kits. Every one of our whānau completed them. So they all received a $500 tailored price package. Most of them didn't realize they weren't just in for a price draw. They were actually going to get a full energy efficiency package that served their needs. Most of them said they would recommend the kits. Most of them said their bills were lower, including in summer, they said on average by $50 a month, which is huge for these families. 4 months later, they still said they were thinking about healthy homes and energy efficiency, and we could even see changes in the actual temperature and moisture levels in their homes that they measured. So we know it works. Following a strong co-design process is really important, not missing steps, even though it's more resource intensive, and ensuring that you do kind of shared learning and reiterate as needed. It's really important to acknowledge our own bias and privilege. The energy system is extremely white, extremely male-dominated, engineering and economics dominated, and it's very Eurocentric. Then we exported that around the world, and that doesn't really work for a lot of the energy users in the world. Also, most of the funding goes to technology silver bullets and not social science work, not community actors, not minority scientists or groups in the community. And, we need to do something to fix that. the most important thing is engaging trusted community middle actors. We all agree on that. It's really important to co-design things with them properly, which again is super hard because they're also hard to reach. They also have trust issues. They usually have the same lived experience as their clients, so they, you know, have the same kind of issues around stigma and fear. And it's not as simple as just rocking up. So I really like the idea that instead of rather inviting them to come to you, that you start going to their stuff and actually start building those relationships. And then, of course, another thing that we tend to do that, you know, should be obvious, but it's really important to do some empathetic listening before immediately jumping to fixes and solutions, because that's often what doesn't work, especially when you deal with Indigenous groups. Yeah, just don't think you always know what you already know. Do I have 2 more minutes or not? Okay, so just to go back out into this bigger question on energy justice, because we're talking about a just energy transition, and we're constantly balanced, like energy policy is really complex. And so what we're constantly balancing is like the trilemma, the three different pulling issues of energy security, which is around affordability, which is around access and, you know, actually having the energy there in the first place. The second one is around economics and energy equity, which is around affordability, but also obviously around profits and fossil fuel subsidies. And the third one is around the environment. And the economists just have been like a little bit, especially neoclassical economists who run a lot of the policy and law, have been a bit too successful to push this, to pull this too strong on the economic side of things, especially at the expense of the environment. What a lot of energy justice researchers are now arguing is that this is actually an energy quadrilemma where we need to balance not just the politics around security and access and the environment around decarbonizing and the climate collapse and, you know, electrifying and dealing with the waste issue, and the economics where we need to balance both profit making by energy industry with providing affordable, you know, access as a basic human right, and these $7 trillion of fossil fuel subsidies that we're still giving out. But that the actual heart of it is energy justice, which should be embedded in policy, in law. It should be around providing true equity and acknowledging the systemic inequity that is structurally there, and actually providing more energy democracy. And so community energy is a great vehicle of doing that. It's obviously not easy to do, but it's super important. So the question is a just energy transition possible? I don't think it is under the current circumstances, especially if we, as I said, keep doing stupid things like paying $7 trillion in fossil fuel subsidies when we're burning the planet to the ground. But talking to people like you, I think maybe, you know, if we can create it from the bottom up, then it is possible. So I leave it with that, and sorry for rambling for so long. Thank you again for inviting me to give this talk.
None of that qualifies as rambling. It was all super informative and very, very interesting for all of us. We are out of time, so we're not going to do a Q&A, but I'm going to just quickly say a few things to wrap up. And unfortunately, I have another webinar to join in about 3 minutes, so I'm not going to be able to extend the time longer. But I did want to just say again, if you missed session 1, it is live on our YouTube channel, and Susie will pop the link into the chat. She did it once, but she'll do it again. We're having another webinar next Monday, and this one will be at a much more reasonable time for those of us in Europe. It's from 1 to 2:30, and this one is focusing on the ACT part of how the CEES partners have either done soft or hard measures with the households they've been trying to reach. And in this case, we're going to hear from Les Sept Vents, which does 3SR approach to renovation, which is self-directed, shared, and supported. And so the idea is to have a lower cost renovation because you get more people involved in it, but you do have someone leading it who is an energy efficiency expert. Our invited presenter next week is also going to be from France. His name is Frank Billot from the Réseau Ecohabitat. And what is super interesting about Frank is he's come up with a very effective and very cost-effective approach for carrying out deep energy renovations for some of the worst performing houses in low-income areas of France. Because he happens to be more comfortable in French, we're going to pre-record his session, but he will, and add subtitles to it, but he will join us for discussion and will facilitate translation. If you're keen to learn more about how to move ahead with implementing some of the ideas CEES has had, we have some open days coming up, which are focused on building capacity among energy communities. And the first one is being held in London on Thursday, the 30th of November. Susie is going to drop the link to register for that. It's happening from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. GMT. If you're in London, please come and join us in person. If you're not in London, then the time to join is actually at 13:30 GMT, because the morning session will be a site visit and it won't be available in the hybrid format. Also, if you're in the UK on Friday, December 1st, CEES will be hosting a high-level policy meeting to discuss policy aspects of tackling energy poverty through energy communities. We'd be happy to have any UK-based people join us, and also to have you help us connect with policymakers or policy representatives who should be in that room. We also have a new blog in response to the EU recommendations on energy poverty, which were published about a week and a half ago. And thanks, Helene Schokart, who has been listening in the background today, for writing up a blog on that. And boy, that was a really good session. And I'm really sorry that I have to leave, and I do have to shut down this Zoom. Otherwise, I would just hand it over to someone else to go with it. But do join us next week, and we have recorded this and we'll put it up, and we will let you know when it's up so you can share it with others. And thank you enormously on behalf of CEES. And thank you also, Rachel Brain from Repowering London, Rachel McNichol from ALIenergy, and Zhao from Coopernico. And if anybody has one last thing to say in 1 minute, I can give you the floor. Otherwise, we're going to call it a morning.